We're now going live on Rockfin, my new subscriber. We're also live on Rumble. Mike, how are you?
Hey, great. And here we are on a new day.
Indeed. I wanted to start by talking a bit about Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House. I think that people, maybe on the conservative side of the fence, might feel disappointed that he has agreed to a temporary budget that does not engage in any cuts, and that he basically had to work with people on the other side of the aisle in order to pass. But I think that they're missing a broader point here. He seems to be a very shrewd politician. He's a very, very well versed trial lawyer who knows how to do things and get things done. And I think that what's going on is that he's going to instead begin to do the cuts through direct appropriations of specific bills, as opposed to the Democrats do these massive packages, which are impossible to challenge because, if you challenge one piece of it, then you're against the children or you're against something else. And he's already started this, according to what I understand. They're putting together very specific appropriations for very specific agencies and costs, many of which are very unpopular, like the IRS. And he's going to then do the cuts that way. And the end result, in a very careful and methodical way, will be that we will get the cuts to the government that we want without all the histrionics, because the liberals aren't going to be able to rail against cutting the IRS.
Well, I think what's happening is that people were expecting, some slash and burn techniques by him, and the fact that he reached out to the other side disappointed people. I mean, the polarization is so great, but clearly he seems to be playing all the angles, and I expect things will change. Maybe not as fast as people want, but remember, it took decades to get things as bad as this. So we're not going to be able to carry 5 minutes.
That's right, and it is a major sea change. And I noticed that I heard an interview where one of these kind of snot-nosed liberal, reporters asked him, "Did you support an organization that is opposed to the idea of separation of church and state?" Being that he had supported this publishing house that basically, as one of their authors once noted, that monkeypox might be connected to gay sex, which it is.
Yeah.
But the point is that Mike Johnson handled it like a masterful lawyer, in that he said, well, actually, when Jefferson came up with that doctrine in terms of his letter to the Danbury congregation, that wasn't meant to remove religion from government. In fact, it was meant to preserve the right of freedom of religion in government. And he just completely dissected the issue in a way that left the guy basically, bloodied and panting on the floor. I mean, he really used a scalpel to take him apart. And I think that he's very able. He's very adept. The barrage of attacks against him are typical, unprecedented though, but really ugly. We had the comedians talking about him having an app with his son and checking on whether they're looking at porn and stuff like that, which actually is he's a good parent. But they're trying to bring these things up as if there's something, sinister about it and bad about being religious. I mean, Jen Psaki. Yeah, go ahead.
What I like about what he's doing, and this is maybe starting with Trump, is fighting back against the idiot media. And what you'll find, I mean, Ramaswamy has done this.
He does, yeah.
There was some recent posting with him and some sort of CNN type who asked him to comment on the use of the term vermin, and he just railed against it. It's like, why are we talking about something substantive? And essentially, although he was more elegant than this, why are you so stupid that's you can't even understand the issues. Who put you up to this? And I remember I met at some Republican thing, God knows how long ago, John Sununu. And I asked him, how come we don't attack the media? Oh, no, you can't attack the media. I mean, which clearly you can. And you show what clay feet they have, because I've told you on this program numerous times, most journalists are surprisingly stupid, have no facts behind what they're doing, and are not able to defend anything. So,
well, they're afraid of not getting their big fat faces on television and in the press. They don't want to attack the media. They don't want to attack. They want to be in the New York Times. I mean, it's very intoxicating to have them, and usually there's behind the scenes deals on that. In fact, not that this is typical, but in Massachusetts years ago, the John Oliphant. He was a columnist, liberal, ultra liberal columnist. He actually said to a Republican congressman in our state, which was back then we actually had one or two. They were very liberal, but they were there. He said, if you vote this way, I'm going to write a puff piece for you. I'm going to write a nice column. And this congressman exposed it. And it was a kind of a quick scandal. But it showed, in a sense, what actually does go on there, even if it's implicit. If you play ball with them, they'll cover you. They'll give you a nice, portrait, and you get your name there, and they won't attack you, and they'll show a nice picture where you don't look like a raccoon, and they'll try to make it look like they'll make it look like a great guy. Of course, what they don't realize is that down the road they'll kill them later. But they play that
really
kind of ball.
From the 1930s, when in exchange for being able to perform acts of necrophilia that Stalin arranged for him, Walter Durante would write these puff pieces from Russia about how great things were. It's appalling how bad journalism is.
Oh, I mean, but this is what they do. I mean, I just saw Tucker Carlson sat down with Bill O'Reilly, and O'Reilly knows everyone in the media, and he said, look, this is really, they did a story on me. They decided that they wanted to paint me as a racist. I have something against black people. And so I was talking about something to do with history, and he's a historian. He's a history professor or history teacher, I think, in high school, and he writes history books. And he said something about in slave times, these people were treated well in a certain way, but in a certain context. And what they did was they spliced that up, and they held only that one piece of the sentence, and they ran that, and they said, Bill O'Reilly is supporting slavery, and O'Reilly was like, this is really evil, and they do this every single day. This is what they do. I've seen this. I saw it myself firsthand. They will not cover something which doesn't fit what they want to say, and they'll slice something up and amplify it when they did. Obviously, they did this to Trump every single day he was in office. So that's what they're doing here. And I don't think it's working with Mike Johnson. I think that it's falling flat. Maybe I'm wishfully thinking here, but
no. You're absolutely correct, because the problem is they still think that there's no alternative media. And I'm not saying that all the normies go out to all these weird sources like you and I do, but there's stuff that comes out now that Twitter has been freed. And I was writing about this. I wasn't able to finish the piece before the show, but Ingrid Jocks from USA Today, who's their token sort of conservative, goes after the Washington Post for removing that Ramirez cartoon, which is 100% true, talking about how Hamas hides behind civilians.
Right.
And they removed the cartoon because of the supposed caricature of giving this guy a big nose, as if caricatures aren't used in cartoons all the time. So,
of course,
the fact that democracy dies in darkness nonsense that the Post had on as their masthead. No, I mean, you can fool people for a while, but trust in the media is not, let's say, what it was.
Right, and also in the area of cartoons, I mean, you have to give some license. I mean, they do draw some rather nasty images. I mean, I remember not that I'm certainly no fan of George W. Bush, but I think that he was always drawn to look like a mouse with the ears.
Yeah,
They would like
yeah,
Mickey
yeah,
Mouse. And of course, Nixon. Oh my God, there was one who back then who made him look so sinister. Talk about raccoons. I mean, they almost made him look like an animal. I mean,
yeah.
but that's what you do. I mean, that is political commentary. They wanted to say that, and they did. That's what you have to give. That's like in medieval times, you give license to a court jester, to say some things that normally a reporter or an official journalist is not allowed to say. But they can do it through comedy. They can do it through. I mean, the whole business of comedy is supposed to be that. It's no longer funny because they don't do it anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean,
But
comedy was destroyed
yeah,
with PC and
it was
cancel
it was
culture.
destroyed by Obama, really.
Well,
You couldn't.
pointing to that, there's always more to the story in this stuff. Bill Burr is one of these people who was always going after cancel culture and so on. But now there's this famous image when Trump appeared, I believe, at a UFC deal in Madison Square Garden,
Mhm.
and this woman sitting next to Burr, presumably his wife, uh, gives the finger, both hands, as Trump's walking by, and you're thinking, "Oh my God," feel sorry for Bill Burr. How do you get involved with this broad? Uh, and I'm just beginning to think that there's a backstory to
Mm.
so much of this cancel culture, and you just find out. I mean, I happen to notice because I read a lot of sources. CPAC, I always had a weird feeling about Matt Schlapp. There was something about the guy who
Something
runs
going
the.
on. Yeah, there's something going on under the hood there.
Yeah, well, what it turns out there are allegations of a sexual assault against some guy,
Yeah.
uh, and CPAC has been spending like well over $1 million in unlimited legal fees to try to suppress this.
Oh, that's been around for a while.
Yeah, so it, there's always something, behind the scenes. So
I know we have
I'm
no idea what's going on with half these
yeah,
people, but I think that the issue of Hamas and Israel is one that is another learning opportunity. Um, in that the media, like this rally that just took place in Washington, which was huge. There were
yeah.
300,000 young people there. My daughter was there. I mean, a lot of people I
Oh,
know
wow.
went. Yeah, it
Okay.
was incredible. Um,
Point of
it
order. Is your daughter getting red pilled from this?
Oh, she's very much on this subject. Oh, absolutely, all the
Oh,
way.
all right.
Well,
All right.
actually, I shouldn't say totally. There's still this idea of a Palestinian Arab state on the West Bank and all that. But nevertheless, I mean, when it comes to Israel's security, yes,
All right.
and
Yeah.
a lot of liberal Jews are, and in fact, an old liberal left wing friend of my wife and I recently ran into my wife on her commute, and he said to her, I never liked or agreed with anything that Chuck says, but I'm starting to sound even more right wing than he is on the issue of Israel.
Funny
And
how that works.
yeah, I mean, I think that that has caused somewhat of a sea change, not amongst the hard left. They're gone, but amongst your kind of old fashioned liberal left leaners
Yeah.
who are really unconscious and are not witting, and they're just sort of not particularly political. They keep their head low and they want to be fashionable. They've got careers. They want to be part of the beautiful people. They want to be in the fishbowl. They're starting to be shocked and think about it. So I don't know if that's going to be a long term thing. We talked about this. That remains to be seen. But on the issue of the Israel Hamas conflict, the media has just been basically reporting verbatim whatever Hamas sends them in terms of propaganda. And then when it turns out to be not true, there's like silence, and then they go on to the next story.
or maybe there's a non-apology apology.
Right. I mean, there's just, or they just ignore it. But I think that, enough Jews are getting hip to that, including liberal Jews. And certainly the state of Israel is not messing around. They step right in and show what's really going on. And I think that that is backfiring on the whole rotten establishment. I think it's going to backfire on the Democratic Party because they're tied hip to branch with this pro-Hamas group, particularly in Congress with the Squad, and this whole Ivy League thing, which I think it's backfired on them. People are
Well,
pulling
what
their
do you think
donations.
about guys like Dershowitz, who at the tender age of 82 or wherever he is, suddenly are looking back and gee, maybe all this liberal claptrap wasn't really wasn't really that great. He's never said it as such, but what do you think of that?
I think that there's a lot of those guys. I mean, and a lot of these liberals. I mean, Barry Weiss is another one. Dave Rubin. These are
Yeah,
liberals, Jewish liberals, who are basically they're not becoming right wing, but they certainly are without knowing it. They certainly are taking positions. They're not they're no longer on the reservation, and I don't see anybody signing up for that old reservation at this point. You've got these younger people. I mean, who do. I mean, not to get personal again, but my daughter or one of her old college mates sent around a petition asking people to sign an agreement that in which they support, Palestine and they want an immediate ceasefire and that Israel is an aggressor. And my daughter responded with a very scathing and well written
hmm.
letter on their Facebook page. And they responded she didn't know what would happen, but they responded very friendly toward her. They were like, wow, we're really thinking about this. I think a lot of it, they're just ignorant. They haven't really thought about the issue. They're just following old leftist reports and tropes. And when you show them something and you give them a different point of view, they do pause and they are thinking about it. And so I think that there is actually a process of learning going on here.
Yeah, I mean the frustrating thing to me is though, how long does it take? How few people get red pill? Uh, how much has to come out? Uh, the fact that at this late stage we can still talk about quote McCarthyism and the total lack of understanding that people had of the historical basis for all this is, I guess, a testimonial to how effective the educational system has been in just passing through these left-wing talking points since the early 1960s.
Well, I mean, they have captured the educational level in the minds of the children, and that's their hope. And that's what Marx talked about in the Communist Manifesto. One of the planks was capture the children,
Right.
get them young, indoctrinate, bring them groom them. Basically, is actually what they're doing. And I think that they still seem to have almost a Stalinist like grip on them. And I don't know if that's something that's going to change, but it only takes a few. It's very difficult for parents to stand up for that because you don't want your child to be ostracized in school, and you can see that there are consequences, and so people tend to keep their head low. But
You
I
keep
think
your
that
head low, but you can at least privately disagree
yes,
with.
and I think that it's becoming more than private, and plus this government obviously has weaponized the FBI and and all of the police agencies to criminalize dissent, and that includes parents. It includes Catholics who go to a traditional mass. It includes anyone who stands up at a school board meeting. It includes people who question COVID. And so the response to that, unfortunately, is fear. people don't want to have that kind of trouble. I don't know what it's going to take to make people change. I think that I was listening to an interview with RFK Jr. On who was he? I don't know who he was talking to, but I think it might have been Joe Rogan. And he made an interesting observation on what's going on with that. He said that things that the left used to support, all of a sudden, they took a 180-degree turn for one reason only, and that's because Trump supported it. They used to rail against the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, the Quintelpro. When Hoover and the FBI actually were going after genuinely bad people like communists and the mob and the Ku Klux Klan. But now that Trump was in office and they were going after him, all of a sudden they're now championing it. Trump's criticizing the great agents of the FBI, and this kind of thing. Even issues like the NAFTA agreement, American, U.S., Canada, Mexico, they railed against that for years. Now they're all for it. Now that Trump is against it. The World Trade Organization, they're all for that. In other words, whatever it is that Trump took a position on, they would take a 180-degree, and they'd be against it. It kind of reminds me of the Hitler-Stalin pact.
Oh, and yeah, I was going to mention that's exactly the same. This mindless communist approach that, Hitler was our enemy, and then when they had the agreement between the two, then suddenly he was our friend, and then when that agreement was broken, he's our enemy again. And it was amazing how few people left based on how idiotic that was.
Yeah, I mean, and that was a change that literally happened in one day. I mean, it was almost
overnight.
I mean, I've read about that. I mean, there was even a case where this communist was giving a speech, and railing of we have to have peace, and all of a sudden he gets a note, someone taps on the shoulder, and he looks at it, Hitler's now invaded Russia. We have to change. And so he threw that speech away and he gave another speech.
Right.
I mean, it's it's like these literal changes overnight based entirely on this agenda, in that case, of communist world control. I don't know if it's quite as explicit now. They don't even know what it is. But I mean, the twists and turns around the Hitler-Stalin pact are very instructive in terms of how this works. And it's something that I think we need to bring up as a way to show that they don't have any basic fundamental beliefs. It's all situational. And not only that, not only is it situational, but they haven't the foggiest idea what the situation is anymore.
No.
So,
and as I've said in a couple of columns, the leftist approach to Hamas versus Israel is so simple-minded. The victim and the oppressor.
right.
And in general, they hate Jews because Jews must be oppressors because they're mostly financially successful with this zero-sum game, Marxist economics. But then, I mean, explain to me, all right, why there were so many Jews in the Frankfurt School. What is going on with them?
Well, first of all, I mean, I'm in preparing my own book on anti-Semitism, and I'm nearing the end of it. I'm doing a chapter on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and in order to prepare for that, I'm reading it, and it's interesting. And my conclusion so far is that it really had nothing to do with Jews, because you can tell by even the way it's written and the situations described that it's not a Jewish thing. I mean, there were Jews involved in what they're describing, but it had more to do with this movement which was around at the time it was published toward world government. And that included not just the communists, but it included the Rhodes Roundtable, it included Theosophy and Spiritism, all these secret societies that came out of the French Revolution. They all were starting to come out and it was really becoming a mass movement. So they published this thing basically as a kind of a limited hangout to try to blame the Jews. But if you read it, it actually is a blueprint for everything that's going on now. It
Well,
is a
who did publish that?
Well, it was published by this guy called Sergius Nilus for the Russian Tsar Nicholas II. Now,
Okay.
Tsar Nicholas II, the last Romanov Tsar of
Right.
Russia, who, of course, would be executed after the Bolsheviks took over, along with his family and everyone associated with his household,
Except
um,
Anastasia, right?
except Anastasia. Somehow she got away.
Yeah.
But he was pretty pissed off at the Jews, basically, because there was a Jewish financier by the name of Jacob Schiff in New York who helped finance Japan in their war against Russia, the Russo-Japanese War, and that Japan won that war, and
Yeah.
it was a major setback for the Russians, and so he blamed the Jews, all the Jews, for this, and he contracted this Nihilus, I think he was an Eastern Orthodox priest, I don't know what, to write this book. That's the official story. No one really knows. But it really is a blueprint for the world order that we're now looking at today. It has nothing to do with Jews. I mean, Jews are involved in it at high levels too. But you can even see at the very beginning of the book that it gets into some of the things you just brought up. How come the Jews are so successful? Must that not be part of some kind of conspiracy? I mean, they obviously didn't get successful on their own. And so you have that element to selling this case and shifting the blame. And what I'd say to that is that the Jews are successful because we're successful. There's a lot of reasons for that. Jews are a little bit outside of the mainstream society, and so they think a little bit more independently, a little bit more differently. They're a little bit more survival conscious. They're a little bit more innovative because they don't necessarily imbibe the world in the same way. They kind of think, they look at all their other things outside. Plus, Judaism, regardless of how liberal or conservative you are, in the end of the day, it does teach family values. It does teach morality. Even if they don't espouse it, it really encourages support for family, for friends. It encourages loyalty, love, marriage. All of these institutions are so fundamental to the Jewish mind and to Jewish life that, and education is a huge one, very, very intense, that you have the result, someone who tries to be upwardly mobile, somebody who thinks outside the box and tries to create. And that can be used for either good or evil, by the way, and some pretty bad ones. But nevertheless, that's what the protocol starts by complaining about, that the fact that Jews have achieved so much success in so many different areas, the only way to explain that is that it's a conspiracy to take over the world. When in fact, I also would note, and this is something I can't really point to yet, but some of the prominent Jewish bankers like the Rothschild family
Yeah.
and the Warburgs and them, they are not the big people. They're really, I mean, they are there as sort of the front people. And I think partially it's because they're Jewish that they are, because it sort of takes the attention off of a much broader group of people who really do wield the power. I don't know who they are, but I don't think that the Rothschilds would actually exist if it wasn't for these sorts of sponsors. It's the only Jewish family in history that actually received aristocratic titles in Europe, and they didn't get that just because of their own power. I think that it's part of a broader group that, I mean, I've seen some writing about this. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the 300 families, and that research by Coleman.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and some of these families go back to Roman times, like the Corsinis, and there's some others. And I think that the Jewish families got into this, and I think that they're more window dressing. I mean, they're brilliant and they're successful, but they're not really the power behind the throne. That's my opinion.
And are you going to get into this in your book?
Oh yeah, that's what my book
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
That's exactly what I'm getting into.
So this was a
In
team.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm getting into in this particular chapter, which is about the protocols of Zion. Um, but I mean, I've written a bunch of other. I mean, this book is interesting. It's been quite a journey. I'm really reaching toward the end of it, but I
Now,
think
how
it's going to
did
be a good one.
Ford become such an advocate?
How did what?
Become an advocate of the protocols? Because
Who?
his name is always identified with that.
Who? I'm sorry.
Henry Ford.
Oh, Henry Ford. I think that Henry Ford, he apologized for that later.
Yeah.
But I think that he just got, it's very intoxicating stuff. I mean, you'll read it and you'll, wow. Somebody gave it to him and he read it and he's like, yeah,
Well,
this
people
is,
always like these unified theories that purport to explain everything.
yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's very appealing. I mean, I'm reading the thing and I'm starting to say, those damn Jews. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, it's powerful. Because it's a natural tendency to look at this stuff and it does explain a lot of stuff going on in the world in a way. But you have to realize that there's an element to it that is very narrow and that's trying to direct attention. So I think that Ford got wrapped up in reading this, and and given what was going on in the world at the time, he became convinced that this is what was happening. Don't forget, the world was moving toward World War, which he was against, and for damn good reason. And he was concerned. I think he was a good man. I don't think that I mean, I think he realized that he'd gone overboard with it at some point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Any unified theory, people just love it. Just brings it all together.
it does.
And
It's fascinating.
and then you have to step back. Now, some people don't. How
No,
much
they
easier
don't.
to view the world through this stupid prism of a victim and an oppressor.
Well, you have to kind of look at the logic of it as well. I mean, there are conspiracies, and there are groups that are trying to, I think, create a world order. But it's not an ethnic group. It's more just a cabal of people. And it's not necessarily even a conscious thing. It's more that they've embraced certain ideas, which you can study. There are philosophies that are discussed by, for example, the Huxley brothers, the Huxley cousins, Aldous and Julian. Aldous Huxley does talk about a world that is basically addicted to drugs, hallucinogenic drugs.
Right. Brave
Has
new world.
that become true? Yes, I would say it has. You go to any 7-Eleven now and you can buy CBD candy, CBD gum. It's everywhere. People are altering their consciousness and they are, experiencing what Huxley calls soma, which is this kind of drug that creates a certain subservience and a certain happy place, which is not based on reality, but that makes you passive and makes you docile. I think that is happening. It's observable.
Well, and there's also the useful idiot phenomenon, like Nikki Haley coming out a few days ago, advocating that everybody who wants to be on social media has to register their true identity.
Oh yeah.
So and it's just amazing that people can come out with these blindingly fascist ideas and think that they're smart somehow, or the universal digital ID, or the one that is really scary, the kill switch on your car.
That's happening.
Yeah.
That by I think it's going to be 10 years down the road, but yes, there is going to be a kill switch on every car that comes out of that's manufactured. and that kill switch is going to be connected to someone who can push the button. Yes, that's not even a secret.
Oh, what is the reasoning behind trying to develop this Chinese social credit system? What is it? Just raw power?
Yeah, it's
People
all
in
part of this. It's part of this agenda of world control. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not putting on the protocols hat here, but yeah, they do describe that in the protocols. It's not a matter of who's behind it. It's a matter of the fact that it's happening and that there are different people who are going to glom onto that. I mean,
so wait a minute though. I thought slavery was a bad thing.
yeah, well, I mean, it's look at. I mean, I think that Aldous Huxley, not to go back, but one of these truth tellers, the just shortly before he committed suicide on television and had it filmed, and he wanted the whole world to see it. The reason they didn't see it was because it happened to coincide on November 22nd, 1963, with the Kennedy assassination.
I never
So
knew that. Okay.
yeah, so we didn't actually see Huxley's suicide, but he talked about um, this idea of what was I lost my train of thought. That this idea that everybody was going to be on dope at on some kind of
All right,
controlled substance.
and when people are talking about the kill switch and social credit and so on, and then I said, so everybody becomes a slave, and that's a good thing.
Oh well, yeah. He actually said that it will be, and this is from an article that he was interviewed for, that the world would become one gigantic international concentration camp
Yeah.
that basically will all be controlled. Yes, they think that's a good thing. Of course, it's not chattel slavery of black people. There's a new thing going on. It's kind of a controlling of the mind, controlling of the spirit. Injecting people with stuff that might alter their DNA that could be utilized down the road. People you might scoff at that, but I think that that's happening.
No, I don't scoff at it. In fact,
Well, you won't, but I'm talking about listeners.
it's been shown in vitro anyway that the mRNA vaccines did affect DNA.
That's right. And
And
now there's been testimony in Congress that it's affecting fertility among women. It's a freaking disaster. This is like it could destroy the entire human race.
Yeah, but a few people made a lot of money off it, so what the hell?
Yeah, they did, but it's also a bigger agenda, which is the population control.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always been part of this whole rotten agenda, going back to Malthus, who was a contemporary of Darwin, and this idea of basically reducing less evolved species. And that's exactly how they looked at it. I mean, I did a book on this years ago. I mean, particularly Darwin's second book, is very explicit about this, that different groups of people in the world are less evolved than others. And he referred to the Aborigines of Australia as closer to the ape than man. He felt that Irish and Scottish are less evolved than the English.
Yeah, of course.
Right? I mean, and when he meant that biologically, that they were not as high on the evolutionary chain. And if you look at the logic of that theory, it makes sense that that would be the case because we're all at different levels of evolution. Every single being nobody is the same. We're not all, the idea that we're all born equal, or that we're all created equal, that's a biblical concept. That comes in the book of Genesis. That comes from when God created men and women, and it does say men and women, by the way.
Yeah.
They were created in His image. Did He create them? That set the stage for Jefferson explicitly putting in the U.S. Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, and by many men, women, and women.
Yeah.
And this is a biblical concept. This isn't a scientific concept. But I mean, it is scientific because it's true, and that there is a divine and spiritual side to existence, which is true. So therefore, in the broad sense, it is scientific. but it's not scientific according to Darwinism, which is that every person is at a different rung of the evolutionary chain. And Darwin is the patron saint of this whole rotten establishment.
Yeah, and while there are people that criticize him today, it's still nowhere near as many as should. Um,
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, it's still, this is still science. I mean, I'm taking college courses now. I'm finishing a degree, and I have to take biology, which is actually pretty interesting. But what the textbook that we're using is Pearson. Need I say more? Pearson is the author, is the publisher of Common Core curriculum. It
yeah,
is dripped in politics and agenda, all about the theory of evolution, global warming, fluoride in the water, you name it. I mean, whatever the left wing uh, project is, they bring it up practically in every page. Um, and so, that is a cornerstone of the entire scientific edifice of the establishment. And that is why when Darwin published that book in 1859, it immediately became it was the first really worldwide sensation that had ever been launched in terms of a media campaign, a public relations campaign. Immediately there were editorials that praised it. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, this was something that was, it hit the firmament with a thunderclap that was unprecedented. And, it went on to Darwin's cousin and close collaborator, Francis Galton, who developed the idea of eugenics. And that it makes sense that he would, because if you're going to have people that are more evolved than others, then naturally you want to breed people to evolve quicker. So you get people who have are seen as superior on the evolutionary scale, and you breed them with other people who have the same. I mean, they were advocating, and Malthus was advocating, that the government give money, subsidies to people to breed and to get married to certain people who were categorized in that way and to have children. And that they were cutting off aid to the poor because they were seen as lower on the scale. They were cutting off food rations too because they didn't want them to breed. I mean, Darwin is very explicit about this. I mean, I'm putting some of this in my book now also. I'm revisiting it. That if you have people breeding who are not good, like up on the scale, we're going to have a denouncement of the human race.
well, I mean, the main appeal of Darwinism was a quote scientific basis to reject religion, and that became
Oh
fairly
yeah.
popular.
Well,
Um,
Darwin's main promoter in England, T.E. Huxley, who of course is Aldous Huxley's grandfather, and Julian Huxley's grandfather, the founder of UNESCO. He was the one who wrote the editorial, which appeared in the London Times simultaneously with the release of the book. And he would travel around. He coined the word agnostic,
yeah,
and he would travel around England where he would debate ministers and theologians in a way that was extremely scornful and insulting. And he would trot the Bible out and he would laugh and he would like, how could you just believe this? And, this kind of like, I mean, we see that now that's accepted as normal, but he would like rip it apart and he would, with filled with the worst kind of like sarcasm. And that set a tone for that kind of approach. That back then they were explicitly and openly anti-religious. Now they try to hide that a little bit. In fact, Julian Huxley, the grandson, who founded UNESCO, was the first chairman of UNESCO. He created what he considered to be a new religion called evolutionary humanism, where the religions of the world would be left in place in terms of ritual and appearance and stained glass and incense and whatever else, but the actual language of the religion, the doctrines of the religion, would be replaced in terms of their meaning. The words would be left there. Kind of works like Fabian socialism. the laws remain in place, but you take the meaning and you change it so that the results are something different. And of course, the Fabian Society of England, their main American branch was the ACLU, founded
Yeah.
in 1920 by Roger Baldwin, who was an open socialist.
Full-on communist.
That's right. Um, so you have basically religion is, and I mean, Catholicism, I think, is a little more resistant to it, but Judaism has been virtually captured, as has Protestantism.
Well, I
But
mean, the thing that hurt the church was the misinterpretation, uh, and I put that in quotes, sort of certain Vatican II documents where conscience was raised to the primary standard. Of course, what they forgot was you needed a properly formed conscience. So there was a mass exodus at that point by lay and religious because whatever their excuse was.
right,
And I think the appeal of atheism, it really had nothing to do with God, quote unquote, but more to do with the fact that conventional morality can be scrapped. And I bet if you looked deep into the history of Grandpa Huxley, there were probably some practices that went on there. In
yeah,
fact,
this
my
exactly.
friend, the late Vin Lewis, Catholic apologist, would say that every time someone leaves the church, there's some incidents of major sin. You're not going to find out what it is. Although there's the famous story
Mhm.
of Fulton Sheen, which I don't know if I mentioned it on this
No,
program. Okay, Sheen is, he was an avid reader, and he's on some long flight, and most of the other passengers are asleep. And so one of the flight attendants comes up and sits next to him. There's nothing else to do. And she rails against, I used to be Catholic, but I quit the church and it was horrible and so on. And he turns to her and said, "When did you have the abortion?"
yeah,
And she just started crying and so on.
Mhm.
And a famous story about him, he had this kind of insight, and I think that's where Vin Lewis got it from. There was inevitably some sinful incident that occurred that they couldn't reconcile, so they left the church. There were a bunch of people that left the Catholic Church when the prohibition or abstinence from meat on Friday was taken away.
right,
Well, I listened to that all my life, and they suddenly changed it. Well, the reason it was changed was that back in the day, it was not considered a delicacy to have fish. Everybody was supposed to have meat. So only the poor people had the fish. But then I remember, and it hit me during Lent, I'm having lunch with my wife. We're having fish on Friday, and it's some elegant fish meal. I'm thinking, wait a minute, what are we exactly giving up here? And it just struck me at that moment, and that's why that was changed. That it was no longer any sort of penance that you're doing. So uh, inevitably, people find their own reason,
Mhm.
but unfortunately, the church now has some bad bishops and a bad pope. Strickland, who was a very conventional Catholic bishop out of Tyler, Texas, has been, quote, fired, which did not go over very well. And there's always,
Why was he fired?
I don't know, essentially saying, not in these words, that the Pope isn't Catholic.
Uh,
And
I had that other priest. I think I mentioned him to you a few shows back. I can't remember his name, but they ran a video of him on the Gateway Pundit where he basically said the same thing, and he did so in scathing terms.
yeah,
And he's been disciplined. He's no longer allowed. It's like what happened to Father Coughlin. Not that I'm a defender of him, but I'm just saying the church has a way of doing this. They'll
well, there
put
was
somebody.
Coughlin and there was Feeney. who you may
Oh
remember
yeah,
from
yeah,
Boston.
Leonard Feeney, sure. Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's a Jew
And
in every
he
living
was
room.
restored, toward the end of his life. But no, he didn't get along with the hierarchy in Boston for good reason.
Yeah, with Cardinal Cushing,
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
who was very
but
was known to be
one of
pretty
the
liberal.
problems with Feeney was that he was sort of arrogant. He was a very brilliant guy.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's a conversations related in one of these many books about Feeney where Cushing calls him and he says to him, "Now, Leonard, we really need to discuss. That's Father Feeney to you." So I mean, he had a bit of an
So he couldn't
attitude.
get along with anybody.
Yeah.
And he ended up, I understand that he kind of moved to the town of Harvard, which has nothing to do with the university. It's up in the apple picking part of the state near New Hampshire. And he formed a bit of a cult up there
Well,
of
there's another
followers.
one in, I believe, Richmond, New Hampshire, that took over. Some of those actually ended up being pretty good people, but they were, I think, in my judgment, a little too proud of the fact that they've been rejected by the mainstream. And the trouble is that, as we refer back to the beginning of the show, maybe Mike Johnson isn't coming in there and burning down everything, but there's something to be said for trying to work within the structure
Oh
without
yeah, I
selling.
mean, without selling himself out. I mean, he's a very, I think underneath that mild exterior is a very tough constitutional lawyer who has been tested. He's been out there. He's done some pretty tough cases and openly religious cases, and he makes no apologies. I mean, they're attacking him in an unprecedented way for being a believing Christian, and he's like, "Yeah, that's right. Come on, I'll take me on that one." He
Yeah.
doesn't back down from it, and it's a very powerful thing to see someone at that high a level of position do that and withstand the withering attacks.
Well, yeah, I
And
think the media is really surprised that this guy hasn't folded like a cheap suit.
yeah, he's fine. He looks like he does he kind of it's kind of a little bit like, frankly, a little bit like Trump.
Yeah, yeah.
Gets into the arena, puts on the gloves, and he's like, okay, let's go around.
Yeah.
He's not. He seems to thrive on the battle, except he's a much kind of milder and kinder exterior than Trump. I mean, it's right, which a lot of people are.
Kinder, gentler Trump.
But yet, he knows how to pull out the stiletto when he needs to. You can tell. He's no
Well, one of the other
pushover.
contemporary things going on, which is, I guess, fun to watch in a way, is this sudden battle between Ben Shapiro, who I really don't like that much,
Yeah.
and Candace Owens, who I don't like that much, and Raheem Kassam posted something on Twitter saying, you know what I feel about this? They're both morons, and that's that. Because
I don't know that much about that either. And I mean, I'm not. I mean, I, with due respect to him, I'm not a big fan of Ben Shapiro either. Um, but I don't know.
well,
I
yeah,
don't really.
he reminds me, and it's sort of almost a personal thing. Uh, I had this friend in high school who was a year ahead of me, uh, who was like ridiculously smart. One of these guys that'd be the academic competition of the entire LA school district,
Yeah.
which is a lot of schools, and he would come out on top inevitably. In fact, he lives in Cambridge, Mass. But the guy who was always a contender was Michael Medved.
Right.
Yeah, my friend Jeffrey Land, who went to my high school, University High School, West LA, Medved went to Palisades High, which was the next high school over, and they were big rivals. And it just got to be a thing that whatever the event was, Jeffrey said, and Medved would be there. The same sort of overly scripted, overly polished, quote, intellectual. And the thing I hated about Medved's show when he was doing it, if you remember, that the answers to people's questions were obviously scripted. There's no way in the world that someone could be so prepared on any random question. It's
Right.
impossible. Nobody's that smart. So it was clear that the calls were picked and somebody researched out a detailed index card, and that was the same thing with Shapiro, this staccato type delivery.
Yeah, very kind of brainy, and I
Yeah.
know people like that. I mean, and I mean, I think Shapiro is not as bad as some people I'm thinking of who there's nothing underneath. I mean, Shapiro does have some,
Oh no, he's got some smarts, but
yeah,
uh, some of it was just too obvious, and he's got hung with it. He put out a bunch of tweets in late 2020, early 2021. Come on, idiots, get the vaccine. Which I
right,
mean, he suffered for it, but uh, so and he represents, conservative Inc., which I don't like. So
right.
does Matt Schlapp, for that matter.
Well, these guys are all sort of court conservatives. Let's just put
Yeah,
it that
yeah,
way. I don't mean to denigrate here, but they're, somebody like a Ben Shapiro, he gets this huge platform,
yeah.
and I mean, I'm not here. Maybe I'm putting on a tin hat, but there's a reason why he gets that kind of coverage. It's sort of like the court. He's the court. The kind of the appointed conservative voice. It's like who's it? Jeff Jacoby at the Boston Globe. He's the
Yeah.
he's the he's the Globe's conservative. But
The
he's not
token
really.
conservative, and of course Shapiro was against Trump, so it's
Yeah,
it's it's pretty obvious.
like Jeff Jacoby. I mean, he's there
Yeah,
putting out
yeah.
flyers on the election. I'm voting for no one. Thank you, Jeff. I need to hear this. And he's it's like really arrogant, and I mean, he actually interviewed me during my congressional campaign, and he decided not to say anything at all. He did not like anything I had to say, and it didn't fit what he's about. So maybe I have a personal feeling about it. I don't know.
No, but I mean, there's some truth to that it's the controlled opposition,
Right.
and the same people that came out against Matt Gaetz. How dare you upset this great congressional thing we have where nothing's occurring? And
Yes.
McCarthy, lied about everything he said he would do. So uh, these are the lace curtain conservatives or
They
lace
are.
curtain Republicans,
Yes.
uh, maybe typified originally by Nelson Rockefeller, or maybe even before that by
Well,
Wyndham Lewis.
Rockefeller was actually not even pretending to be conservative. I mean, he was a liberal in every sense. I think.
Well, he
Generally, it
was a
just happened
liberal,
to be.
but he had to be a Republican because he didn't want to be with those smelly blue collar Democrats. So
Yeah.
he had to
Plus,
be.
plus, he had to be. They needed to have a Republican. That's like Jacob Javits in New York
Yeah.
too. I
Oh
mean,
God.
these guys are liberals who just there's Republicans now like that. I don't know if I'd say McCarthy is, but they're really not Republicans.
Oh,
They
Ken Buck.
ran as a Republican because they want to have an opposition party, and it was an opportunity, but they don't at all vote for or support
Yeah. Yeah.
conservative or Republican ideas. And there's several of them in the Republican Party, still is. We could point to them. I mean, it's they've become known. I mean, Swalwell. Well, he's a Democrat. I'm thinking of who is it? The one on the not Liz Cheney was bad enough, but that other guy on the the 9/11 so-called commission.
Oh,
You know,
I'm
you,
sorry.
you know
I'm
who I
trying to
mean.
forget his name.
Yeah, very selected
Illinois.
Republican.
But well, Liz Cheney represents that,
Oh,
and
totally.
she brings to it this sort of Dick Cheney constant war mentality. Uh, she's horrible. She's the
Oh, yeah,
insufferable.
the worst. Yeah,
And the
terrible.
fact that she was defeated in the primary by 40 points didn't shut her up.
No, in fact, she wants to run for. She's going to run for president, and knows she'll get support
Yeah.
amongst the same sort of uniparty that Trump opposes. Anyway, but I just think that with Mike Johnson in place, I feel a little hopeful. You know,
Yeah, I would
I think
agree. I mean, you're not going to get someone that's going to tear it down as much as you'd like that, maybe. But
no, he knows how to play the game, and he knows how to, but he doesn't seem to bend when it comes to compromising his values. He just knows how to get it done carefully and surgically, if you will, and
and
he is
he's
doing that.
feared by the other side because there's so much sleaze with the Pelosi slash Hakeem, what's his name,
Yeah,
Jeffries group,
very bad.
that they're fearful of this sort of thing because here's a guy who really is a white knight. So what are you going to come out and say? Well, he's not dirty like me. I mean, they're stymied a little bit.
Yeah. So, Mike, what do you have coming up on your
I was
Substack?
about halfway through with the piece that I had the show been on Friday would have been ready, of course,
Oh well, sorry.
about the chickens coming home to roost. Um, and you can probably see where that's going to lead.
Oh, that's a great expression, like the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, right? The
Yeah, yeah.
chickens have come home to roost. You
Well, I
know.
think there's some pretty obvious examples of how uncontrolled immigration. Now you have. Well, I mean, come on. The San Francisco Bay Bridge was blocked by these pro-Palestinian demonstrators. You've seen the videos of the Palestinian guys tearing down American flags on Lexington Avenue in New York.
and engaging in insurrection at the Capitol, I may add.
Yeah, but
Right,
somehow, yeah, but none dare call it treason, right? So,
And meanwhile, in San Francisco right now, Gavin Newsom has turned the city into Beijing.
yeah,
Have you seen the pic? They cleaned it up. They took out all the crap on the streets, and they've
yeah,
swept away the homeless. And they're putting up gigantic communist flags with big posters everywhere. It looks like Pyongyang. You know? Anyways, but Mike, as always, thanks for joining me.
well, always a pleasure.
Talk to you
And
next Thursday.
we will see you next time.
You bet. All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right.